Well, you've successfully made it through Module 1. I will be grading those in the next few days and getting feedback to you. And the one thing I'd like to make sure I mention as you do some of the problems for the modules is to make sure you show as much of your work as you can, because I'm pretty good about if you're on the right track, I give you credit even if you didn't maybe get the final answer correct. So please show your work as you kind of work through the process. What I'd like to do now is introduce Module 2, and we're going to focus on chapters 4 and 5 for Module 2, not 3 this time. And 4 deals with cost, and 5 is capital budgeting. And it's kind of interesting. Cost, I mentioned to you that I'm a director, a CEO of a federally qualified health center. And costs are a big part of what we do because the system is based on setting a Medicaid and a Medicare rate based on cost. And as crazy as this sounds, you spend as much as you can in your first year to get your costs elevated. And it's a pretty simple division problem. You take your total related cost and divide it by the number of patient visits, the people you've seen and the number of visits to get your rate for Medicaid and Medicare. And so we were able to successfully pull off a very high rate. So cost was important to us. We spent a lot of money to get in, but it was legitimate cost. They have to be. And then the idea over time is you want to be able to reduce your cost, and that's, of course, how you kind of come out ahead on that. Now, the health center, the federally qualified health center system, is based on basically breaking even. That's the whole idea, that your cost equal kind of your revenue or your profit, but it's okay to have an extra excess of money, and those are the kind of things you then in future years put back into the program or set aside for kind of a rainy day type thing. So it's okay, but break even, and we're going to talk about that some, and you're going to focus on it with this module. So chapter 4 is going to focus on cost. Now, something that I mentioned, the rate, and I'd like to just say to you, it's called a PPS rate. That stands for Prospective Payment System. And in Indiana, you file with Myers and Stauffer. It's an accounting firm. You file that cost report with them. They evaluate it. Then they end up, with HRSA, they have an agreement with them. They set our final PPS rate for both Medicaid and Medicare. Medicare is set in our area on a geographical basis, so it's capped, but the PPS rate on Medicaid is pretty much open-ended as long as it's a reasonable expected cost. So PPS rate is something you may hear me talk about throughout the semester. So cost, we're going to focus on how the behavior of cost and how the volume of services play into that. So if you're setting up a break-even analysis, you may be looking at adding services, but there is a point of where those services may take you where it isn't worth it. You may financially invest more than you don't hit the break-even point. Now, in some cases, breaking or suffering a little bit of loss may be an okay thing. If you're developing customer relations, building up clientele, writing it off maybe for the public good, sometimes that's an okay thing, but generally you're wanting to hit that sweet spot, so to speak. We're going to talk about outsourcing. Outsourcing is something I was a little leery of until the last few years. There are some things that lend themselves well to outsourcing. We outsource our billing currently because that's an ever-evolving, changing field. We also have patient navigation services, and we work with a company called ClaimAid to help in that area. But there are times when it isn't a good idea to outsource. You can do it in-house and do it much more cost-effective. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about break-even analysis. We're going to talk about your role or the manager's role in break-even analysis and kind of what role you play in terms of being kind of the conductor of the orchestra to try to hit that break-even point. And then we're going to talk a little bit about, or introduce to you the introduction of activity-based costing. So that's chapter 4, and we'll be setting up problems to kind of go over that material. The next part is chapter 5 deals with capital budgeting. and kind of why is that a separate thing. I've had the experience, I've been through two major capital projects since I've been the director of the health department and the Federally Qualified Health Center. We were able to raise originally most of the funds, the grant funds, to build our building. It's a 12,000 square foot building, and we raised those funds through basically federal funds and some localized matching. So that was our first major project. And then the second one was actually, in addition, we received additional grant money in its entirety that was paid for by a state community health center grant for our add-on. And then we're currently in the middle of at our heating and air system. When it was originally set up, the contractor kind of went on the cheap, and it should have been zoned in terms of certain areas and rooms, and it was not. So we've long-term had a fix. We've kind of piecemealed it together, but now we're going to fix it and fix it right. And the total cost is a little over $700,000. But what we agreed with our county folks is they're going to pay it up front, and then we modified a rent agreement, a lease agreement with them to pay them back over time. And I think that will be paid back over 20 years. So we're actually paying for the heating and air conditioning fix for the building through a lease agreement. So that's another way of kind of attacking and approaching the capital parts of this. We're going to talk about the time value of money, and I think that's a relevant issue in this field, but just in your everyday life. I have 24-year-old twins, and they recently graduated from the IU system, and my daughter's buying a house right now, so we're kind of working through some of those things in terms of the time value of money, and how important that is in terms of savings. And then we'll also define and discuss the cost-benefit analysis. And you've probably heard of this, but this is where you may be looking as, say you're running a certain service line in a hospital. It's where you're looking to see what that exact point is where it's a benefit. It's cost-based, and often that's most of your decision, but as I said earlier, sometimes that decision is based in what's good for the community, good for your clients, so it isn't always laid out strictly as a financial basis. But in this scenario, you do need to look at that and make some judgments, because of course you don't want to run something at a loss or set something up where long-term you can't keep it going. So those are the first two, or actually chapters 4 and 5 of the second module. And again, show your work when you do the homework. I will soon have those posted in terms of what you should be doing. And I just want to summarize this module a little bit. And mention again, with the Federally Qualified Health Center, that's kind of what I know and what I do. And it's based a lot on cost and how, but that can be a good thing in terms of setting up your rates and how you're going into things. And then break-even analysis is something that we look at on a pretty regular basis, because we're looking at new service lines and other ways of doing things before we start. And so break-even analysis, and of course I mentioned the outsourcing, which can be a good thing as you look at this from a cost-benefit analysis. Again, I've mentioned two major capital projects I've worked with: the building, the addition, and then of course the heating and air fixed. And then, as I mentioned in the opening video, and I'll emphasize this throughout the course, I want this course to be grounded as much as possible in what you would encounter on a daily basis from a practical speaking standpoint as a manager. I want it to be practical, and I want it to be as useful as possible. There are times I think some of the problems and things we get into might be at a higher level than kind of the average or the mean in terms of what a public service or a healthcare administrator may encounter, because oftentimes I have a CFO that works with us, and I may include her in some of these videos later on, but where she can kind of contribute the technical expertise financially. So I'm trying to keep it grounded, keep it useful, keep it as something you can gain knowledge that you can apply in your jobs or in your future jobs. But knowing finances, being aware of them, and how to leverage and use them is vitally important. So glad you made it to the second module. I'll be coming back in future modules and kind of doing updates. And I really want to thank everybody for their introductory paragraphs. We've got quite a crew of experience and people out there. There's some things maybe you can even teach me throughout the course. So I'm Eric Colder, I'm your instructor, and I'm excited about this, and let's push on to the next thing. Thank you.